The Elder Scrolls 6 is missing in action. In a prior video, I dived into how Bethesda, the developers behind the Elder Scrolls and the Fallout series, dropped the ball when it came to creating, or just not creating rather, a follow-up to the cultural phenomenon known as Skyrim, which was the previous Elder Scrolls title that released in 2011. If you have not seen that video yet, I recommend giving it a watch as it kind of informs some aspects of this video's thesis. But to overall sum up the point, Skyrim was a huge game, and the fact that Bethesda hasn't released a follow-up title within the intervening 14 years was a major unforced error, meaning that there has been an Elder Scrolls-sized void in our gaming entertainment space. However, Bethesda's loss is so many other developers' gain. In fact, there have been an abundance of high-quality fantasy games in the intervening years like The Witcher 3 and Baldur's Gate 3 that have taken the gaming world by storm. No relation. But with that said, none of them really exactly play like Skyrim. For the most part, they're entirely distinct, though with one exception, by which I mean Avowed. Now to be clear, Avowed isn't as good as The Witcher 3 or Baldur's Gate 3, but it does mimic many Elder Scrolls traits. In fact, this adventure from Obsidian, a studio that, akin to Bethesda, is now owned by Microsoft, Avowed plays like an Elder Scrolls game, albeit more streamlined. It's an action RPG set in a fantasy world, technically Eora, which means that Avowed is canonical with the Pillars of Eternity games, so that's pretty fucking neato. Contains a shit ton of lore, open maps to explore, a fantasy story with heavy themes of reincarnation, which is very Wheel of Time-esque, just minus Robert Jordan's concerningly elevated horny levels, various fantastical races, some solid moral choices, a rewarding progression system, and fluid combat mixing swordplay, archery, and magic, meaning that Avowed just shares numerous commonalities with Skyrim. Yet these similarities can only go so far before noticing some of the differences. Because there is only one Jarl Balgruuf, and he does not share power. And there is a reason for Avowed's differences, and that reason is that Avowed is not a AAA title with near infinite funding and manpower. Instead, Avowed is a mid-budget game, or AA, if you like to refer to the budgeting backgrounds of all games as different types of batteries. But anyway, the point. Avowed rests between the small-budget, independent, and the blockbuster AAA space, a place that Obsidian feels pretty comfortable in. Sure, the studio has created AAA titles in the past, most notably Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2 and Fallout New Vegas, which the latter game is considered by many to be the greatest Fallout game and is, humorously enough, beloved by the transgender community. Because why not? We have exceptional taste. But Obsidian's current MO revolves around smaller or mid-tier budget titles. Titles like The Outer Worlds, Pentiment, and now Avowed. In a Eurogamer article by Robert Purchase, Avowed game director Kerry Patel detailed Obsidian's financial strategy with Avowed. Per the article, at Obsidian, we've always been very upfront that we make very ambitious games, but we don't have 400-person teams. We are working off a budget. Avowed very intentionally has a focused scope. This isn't a game where we're trying to create an endless playground that players can sink hundreds of hours into. This is something where we had a very clear experience in mind. We had a story to tell, we had several corners of this very beautiful world that we wanted to take players through, and we wanted to make sure that experience was dense, entertaining, and varied. And then players are going to roll credits, and maybe they'll start a new game. End quote. To sum up Patel's point, Avowed lacks the gargantuan size and doesn't feature the bells and whistles that accompany an adjacent AAA title. You know, because Avowed isn't a AAA title. Striking a delicate balance between high production value and working on a budget, Avowed functions due to how the developer picked and chose the necessary gameplay focal points for the experience they are attempting to create, and what, for the sake of time and budget, could be left on the cutting room floor. Hell, Avowed's smaller budget forced Obsidian to drastically alter the game's design mid-development. As detailed in the earlier mentioned Eurogamer article, which is very much worth a read, link in the description, Avowed was initially conceived as a PvE live service, and one with a more grounded art style at that, but alongside how the developers struggled to splice multiplayer gameplay with an impactful narrative, finances were a concern. After all, live services, while very lucrative if successful, that's a big fucking if, cost a boatload of money to develop and maintain. Unless, of course, that live service is Concord, because there was no maintaining that shit show of a live disaster. It's why Concord is a one-word punchline, a joke with maximum payoff requiring no setup, which is a very impressive feat. But anyway, the point, Obsidian pivoted Avowed's design back in 2021, resulting in the game we ultimately received earlier in 2025, which is a single-player narrative-driven RPG, not a live service. And I'm pretty thankful for that because Avowed is pretty good. Maybe not perfect because not everything about the game's design is seamless, but it's still enjoyable, features fun gameplay, and an intriguing story. And a story with interesting themes at that. Avowed's main protagonist, which we can customize their name and appearance, is an envoy for the Empire of Adir, and sent to the Living Lands at the behest of the Emperor. As a setting, the Living Lands teems with dangerous wildlife and people of sketchy repute, a near-lawless realm without countries or kingdoms, aside for larger settlements and their surrounding areas, which means it's ripe for an imperial power to set up shop. In other words, Adir is actively colonizing the Living Lands, even establishing a foothold in the region with the Adiran city of Paradise, something that many of the Living Lands residents view less than favorably, because Paradise? More like a paradise nuts. At the behest of the Adiran Emperor, the envoy's mission in the Living Lands is to investigate the Dream Scourge, a sickness of the mind afflicting the denizens, both sentient races and creatures, of the Living Lands and transforming them to a state of violent psychotic madness. Once in the Living Lands, though, the envoy discovers that there are more problems than just the Dream Scourge. In fact, many of the Living Lands inhabitants actively resist Adir's colonization attempts, even to the point of rebellion. A brewing conflict that the Steel Garrote further escalates. As an Adiran paladin order, the Steel Garrote behaves lawlessly and violently toward its enemies, which is a solid chunk of the Living Lands populace, as if it were fantasy ice, stoking the fiery flames of discontent by oppressing those they believe are beneath them, thus ensuring that the people of the Living Lands will distrust every Adiran by default, even our lovely envoy. Additionally, the envoy is a godlike, essentially chosen by one of Eora's gods to be their living champion, something that comes pre-packaged with unique magical capabilities as well as distinct visual appearances, a lot of which with fungi, marking them as a godlike. Though unlike other most godlikes who are aware of what god has claimed them, the envoy's god remains a mystery to our player character, a mystery that raises further questions upon the envoy arriving in the Living Lands, most because once the envoy reaches the continent, they hear a disembodied voice that nobody else is sonically attuned to. Though thankfully for the envoy, those conversations are generally innocuous. Avowed's narrative works. As a main protagonist, the envoy drives a hefty amount of the action, mostly because the Adiran aggression creates a hostile and mistrustful environment that our lead character must diffuse, or further stoke if you're an asshole, in order to solve problems without resorting to stabby stab. And then there's the compelling sense of mystery as we wonder what god does the envoy belong to? What caused the Dream Scourge? And how can the envoy stop its spread? Who does this disembodied voice belong to? Why won't they let the envoy sleep? Nightmare Insomnia is just the worst, man. Regardless, Avowed storytelling intricacies encourage the player to keep engaging with the game. The envoy is also a good character to play as. At Avowed start, we customize our envoy and equip them with a specific background that will unlock unique dialogue choices throughout the game, which is cool. And by being an official envoy that is pretty much above the law, playing as the envoy reminded me of my time spent playing as Commander Shepard from Mass Effect of all things, because similar to Shepard, the envoy wields the full authority of their respective government in order to achieve their goals, because I will take that blueberry muffin by force if necessary. But with that said, Avowed differs from Mass Effect by how its moral choices reject the good and evil binary and are more related to the political leanings of its players or the type of character that the player desires for their envoy to embody. Sure, the Steel Garrote are the clear antagonistic force of the story, because have you seen what antagonist Inquisitor Ludwin looks like? Like, look at her face. It's a face that makes me think a lot of things, and none of them are sunshine and puppies. The Steel Garrote are kind of the bad guys here. But even with that caveat, a lot of the moral choices aren't good versus evil, and thus are more nuanced than what is in a BioWare game. Personally though, I played the Envoy akin to how I played Commander Shepard in the Mass Effect trilogy. A hero that will stand up to any injustice that they see. Because I'm biological Riley, and I'm the goodest girl on the Citadel. However, Avowed's big player choice decisions are of little import to the playable world itself. Sure, personal morality and contribution to the game's ending matter overall, but in terms of changing Avowed's world and the Envoy's various relationships with people and factions while still playing the game, there just aren't many decisions like that. And look, I understand that Avowed's budget was finite. This is a AA game rather than a AAA game after all. But it's still worth noting that this is an area that was sadly lacking. With that said though, Avowed's story is pretty good, a quality that the game's side activities and optional missions also maintain quite consistently. Unlike many open world or open world-ish games, the vast majority of Avowed side quests don't feature the traditional open world busywork that has become so trite as of late. Sure, there are bounties that the player can collect, some that even lead to bandit camps, which, dear god, kill this game design trope with holy fire. But with those exceptions out of the way, most side quests within Avowed contain their own narratives, characters, and such, fleshing out this world with more dimension than just climb the highest point to unlock part of the map. Feel like you're shopping for overpriced groceries rather than playing a video game, and so on and so forth. Avowed side quests just contain a personal touch that other adjacent games lack. And this sets up Avowed's most critical element: orgies. No, I'm just kidding, I'm referring to combat. Avowed's combat is fluid and crisp. Control-wise, the triggers are mapped to both hands, allowing the player to dual-wield weapons, carry sword and shield, 2 pistols for those that want to buckle some swash, and a wand and spellbook for those who want to play this game like a witch or a wizard from that overrated fantasy series penned by the dastardly lady whose brain is clearly rotting from the 1-2 punch of terminally perusing the Nazi website and tolerating the presence of black mold over that of trans people. Please don't sue me. Additionally, there are two-handed weapons like great swords, rifles, battle axes, bows and arrows, and such, meaning that there's plenty of variety in the combat here. Though admittedly, the game's combat is missing much in the way of combos and the like, because adjacent to Skyrim, Avowed's melee gameplay is fairly basic regarding its dearth of more complex maneuvers. The hacking and slashing is literally hacking and slashing, as, with a sword or other type of melee weapon, the player just swings like a bad dancer at a wedding, and that person is me. If anything, you just swing the sword without much tactical approach, save for holding down the trigger, which performs a heavy attack that will also break an enemy's block. No relation, because Avowed, like Skyrim, also has a parrying feature and the ability to stagger enemies. But with that said, Avowed's melee combat is superior to that of Skyrim. In fact, the action gameplay alone flows smoothly. The parrying mechanic is far more intuitive than the one present in Skyrim, because in Skyrim the player can go eons without realizing that the game contains a functional parrying mechanic, which, Jesus Christ game, be proud of your gameplay attributes. Have some goddamn self-respect. There's the fact that stagger accumulates and stuns enemies, which gives players a window to execute a powerful multi-hit attack with the click of a button. There's a stamina bar, and there's the ability to dodge. And of course, there is the glory of the inventory wheel. Blessed be its name. In mid-combat, the player can essentially pause the encounter and summon a wheel with various actions and items. Actions including physical attacks and magic spells, utilizing essentia that are earned throughout Avowed's level progression system. More on that in a bit, as well as special godlike abilities that also use essentia and are unlocked by advancing the main story or completing certain side activities, as well as inventory items found in the world like grenades, consumables with stat buffs, and etc. As I said, the wheel is glorious. The wheel knows all. And admittedly, these items and abilities can be mapped to buttons and prompted via a quick use inventory slot. Hell, throwing grenades has its own dedicated button, because chucking explosives at enemies is critical for conflict resolution, which sure as hell beats group therapy. But the Envoy eventually accrues so many action spells and items that, maybe save for health and essence potions, the action or inventory wheel is the easiest way to select your attacks attacks and defenses, kind of like selecting your special abilities and attacks in Mass Effect, sans the sexy aliens. Also adjacent to Mass Effect, Avowed has a squad system as well. Because yes, companions are a core aspect of Avowed, both narratively and in the gameplay. Narratively speaking, these characters in Kai, Marius, Giada, and Yatsley display distinct personalities and are four-dimensional characters, even equipped with their own backstories and character-specific side quests. Though some of these character-specific side quests aren't very inventive. In fact, some of the missions just involve traveling to places and doing so while lacking any sort of gameplay conflict. Like there's this one quest that involves going to someone's house. That's it. No enemies to fight, or puzzles to solve, or any of that shit. You just go to a house. And yes, I'm aware that character development is important as well, and what this house means to our companion character is incredibly relevant, but we only spend 2 to 3 minutes in this house and do absolutely fuck all in it. All we did was go to a house. Though as a millennial, I don't even know what a house is. Regardless, the companions are pretty damn good in terms of characterization. Kai deals with some traumatic memories, Marius runs from his past, Giada grieves over losing her parents as a child, and Yatsley desires to be a great mage, meaning that all the companions feel fleshed out. The companions complement the gameplay as well. The inventory wheel, the one that stops time and thus imbues players with a tantalizing taste of divinity, additionally allows the player to command their companions to perform specific actions. Phrasing. In fact, each companion prioritizes a specific fighting style. Kai pummels enemies with physical attacks, Marius' combat expertise lies with range and environmental traps, Giada supports the party through healing and essence recuperation, and Yatsley conjures magic shit because she's a chaos gremlin. This was enjoyable because utilizing your companion's attacks and abilities also was another thing that reminded me of Mass Effect. Giving that dilating time to weaponize your comrade's abilities with precise execution was a major part of the combat experience in the Mass Effect titles. Avowed shares this commonality with Mass Effect, something that's especially cool considering that Kai's voice actor is Brandon Keener, who also voiced the beloved Garrus Vakarian in the Mass Effect trilogy, which is awesome, though admittedly not really relevant for anything in this video, aside from just being a nifty tidbit of trivia. Also, I did want to write a Garrus Vakarian joke, but it needs more calibrations. Now let's move on to the level progression system. At Avowed start, the player chooses their background for the envoy, alongside what stat points they desire to begin the game with. Though don't fret, you can respec for a fee at any time during the game. These points affect the envoy's combat capabilities, strength, damage dealt, total health and essence, carried weight, speech checks, and such, and are rewarded throughout Avowed's runtime as the player levels up by acquiring experience by completing quests, killing enemies, and etc. Though I'm sure you already understand that. I assume you've played video games before. Additionally, the player earns skill points through leveling up. The skill points are used via 3 different upgrade paths that focus on melee combat, ranged attacks, and magic shit. These options unlock passive attributes and powerful attacks, as well as strengthening them, and Avowed encourages players to experiment with these attributes to see what befits their playstyle. After all, the player can respec at any time, though for a fee, of course. Nothing in this world is free, hashtag fantasy capitalism, so they can play around with different builds at their own leisure. Phrasing. Speaking for myself, I was a battle mage that specialized in attacks involving pyro, because as it turns out, Avowed is a great vehicle to quell my biological desire to commit arson, because this game keeps me out of prison. Furthermore, companions receive skill points as well that unlock passive attributes, support abilities, attacks, and upgrades to said attacks, ensuring that Avowed rewards the player consistently across the board, and doing so without skeevy monetization practices that devalue a given game's progression system as well as basic human decency. Fuck you. Additionally though, Avowed boasts a progression system that goes beyond skill points. See, the envoy accrues a boatload of items throughout their journey, and these items include weapons and armor and materials that upgrade those said weapons and armor when at camp. Because Western RPGs these days are obsessed with Dungeons and Dragons camping mechanic. God, I've never seen gamers just so wholeheartedly embrace camping before. It's so far removed from their natural habitat. But to get get back on topic, the Envoy levels up their weapons, both in terms of damage, defense, and such, by also imbuing them with elemental effects and special statistical attributes, or by enhancing weapons already bolstered by status effects, which the Envoy generally earns after completing quests and side quests, as well as by defeating bosses, especially Karen in HR, meaning that Avowed just offers rewards and encourages player investment for this reason as well. Additionally, the Envoy collects items that aren't weapons, armor, or materials that can further upgrade their abilities and stats. Boosting the Envoy's capabilities, the Envoy can don jewelry and other clothing, increasing the Envoy's stat numbers and or physical and magical capabilities. The types of items that add a nice little gameplay wrinkle that further allow the player to customize their character. And then there are also consumables and currency. There's health and essence potions, money, and things that can be sold specifically to get more money, because of course this game has an economy. And then there are other types of items and food like meat, liquor, fruits, vegetables, and other things that can be mixed and cooked into a pot to create consumables, meals, elixirs, and such with various stat effects, buffs, healing properties, and etc. Avowed's exploration also benefits from the wealth of items scattered across the living lands. With all these items to accrue alongside the wealth of side quests, the game encourages the player to roam the living lands and search every nook and cranny for the earlier mentioned variety of items to collect, roaming the land, scanning for any and all items to potentially benefit the Envoy's quest to defeat the Dream Scourge, becoming the true embodiment of a hoarder's wet dream. Now, Avowed's various gameplay qualities, of which, as we know, there are many, reflect a modernized and streamlined take on Skyrim. Because yes, we're finally getting back to that point made earlier on in the video and in the previous video. Only took me several fucking minutes. See, Avowed's combat embodies Skyrim's ebb and flow, as well as the similarities that the two games have in how you approach wielding and utilizing weapons. But with that said, Avowed's combat feels better. The action just feels more fluid, crisp, and impactful, as well as intuitive with the inclusion of an inventory wheel. Because that shit is just so much more convenient than actually looking into your paused inventory and going through God knows how many swords, jewels, and wheels of cheese. So much goddamn cheese. Furthermore, Avowed's movement feels far more natural and lighter, especially when running, jumping, sliding, and climbing up ledges, which in Avowed has its own special animation. Very unlike Skyrim. The visuals and graphics just pop, kind of like my ass in a cocktail dress, which very much befits a game released in 2025 rather than a title from 2011. The Envoy's companions actually add to the story in an adventure rather than just being vessels for combat, and even in combat, the way that those said companions add to the gameplay is improved, considering that we have more control over their special attacks and abilities. Then finally, Avowed's main storyline is the core narrative appeal of the game, rather than compared to Skyrim's main storyline and its impact to that game. Meaning that this is just another way where Avowed adds to the Elder Scrolls formula, albeit one that doesn't include cat people. However, Avowed being a streamlined Skyrim, and one on a budget at that, means that the developers at Obsidian had to cut certain corners that the developers at Bethesda didn't have to do when making Skyrim, or at least comparatively so. For one thing, Avowed's world isn't as expansive as that of a Bethesda title. In Avowed, the game level caps at 30, and it takes roughly 60 hours of playtime to experience the whole game. Furthermore, Avowed isn't a traditional open world experience. Divvied up into 4 separate yet fairly large maps, the game sees the Envoy traverse 4 fairly distinct interconnected zones, both scenically and societally, like the coastal yet colonized Dawnshore, the rugged and arid Shatterscarp, the mountain dwarven lands of Galwain's Tusks, and the foresty Emerald Stair, which is home to the Animancers, a people who embrace a taboo form of magic science by using essence to animate the dead, which is just cool. Also, Animancers talk with very over-the-top Italian accents, which amused me greatly. Though thankfully Giada's Animancer accent is comparatively subdued. Otherwise, I would have referred to her as Madame Gelato. But to get back on topic, Avowed isn't a proper open world, you know, like how Skyrim was, given that Avowed is sectioned off and unfortunately doesn't really convince the player to return to prior areas that they had already progressed through in the narrative. narrative, or at least not very often, because once the player travels to a new zone, we pretty much view the prior zone as more or less being done, very much akin to the Andy and Woody meme. Another issue with this game is the stealth system, which, to put it kindly, really fucking sucks. Among its most basic ass pumpkin spice mechanics, Avowed stealth gameplay merely includes a crouch button, a takedown ability that doesn't always kill enemies, which what the hell is the point of stealth then? There's hiding in tall grass, and that's it. It was just a useless mechanic. And by being worthless, the game just doesn't entice the player to venture on a stealthier build, which is just polarly opposite to Skyrim, which has a stealth system that wrecks, all to the point that once the player levels up enough, they can essentially crouch right in front of an enemy and still be invisible, which practically makes the Dragonborn become John Cena. Admittedly though, in Skyrim, this is a problem in and of itself, because it's just way too easy to fulfill your childhood dream of becoming a ninja, albeit a stupid ninja, but a ninja nonetheless. But at least this game design fault has the courtesy to be fun, which is very much unlike Avowed stealth system, which is boring. Additionally, Avowed's NPCs differ from Skyrim's in the sense that they don't feel alive, which is something that I strongly relate to. See, in Skyrim, NPCs have daily routines and move around depending on if they're working or going home, because they have lives, goddammit. But Avowed's NPCs are more static and immobile, often rooted to the spot. They are nowhere near as lively in comparison. Avowed also doesn't feature a theft system, which creates a little dissonance between the player and the game. However, let's not call it ludonarrative dissonance. That shit is so 2013. In fact, the Envoy can obtain items regardless of circumstance, including by theft, something that should cause conflict with the Living Lands populace, but surprisingly doesn't. They act like they don't give a fuck, meaning that the player can pilfer someone's personal belongings and ransack someone's house, even a companion, and essentially get no pushback from the owner of these items, save for maybe a funny retort. Which I understand that the Living Lands is lawless, and the Envoy has the express written authority from the Ediran Emperor to essentially do whatever the hell she wants, Ron Swanson style. But you know, it's kind of weird. It just is. And finally, one other issue is that enemies don't really respawn in this game. In fact, once you clear out enemy combatants, they don't respawn, causing many of these areas of the zone to feel lifeless and empty when retraversing through them, meaning it just breaks the immersion of the experience just a little bit. It's a problem. Now, all of these creative decisions do make sense in the grand scheme of things, even despite how they represent cracks and fissures within this gameplay experience. Because once again, Avowed isn't a AAA game, meaning that some sacrifices had to be made for the greater good. Whether it's the lack of a theft system, of NPCs having actual lives, or foregoing enemy respawn because it would impact the game's level progression, I understand why Obsidian made the decisions they did. But still, these are faults. Faults pulling on the loose threads that threaten to tear open the seams of this experience. They remain problems, and as a critic, albeit a little one, it's important to point these issues out, because you won't get any bullshit from me save for my sense of humor, which people tell me is funny, I guess. With that being said though, Avowed is a good game despite these compromises, mostly because Obsidian focused their time and manpower on the more critical aspects of the experience, which is the narrative, the fluidity of both combat and exploration, and the colorful visuals, with a shit ton of mushrooms added on. No relation to The Last of Us though. Avowed is just a fun experience because of the prioritization of what the developers viewed as the most core and essential elements. The game just works despite the inherent imperfections, meaning that Avowed truly is a streamlined Skyrim.